Hey there, welcome to this episode of Leadership in Aviation. I am so excited to have met by happenstance a former Marine who is now the Vice President of Operations at a company called DevReady. So from Marine and Marine One helicopter operations to a tech startup. Steve Carroll, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Renee. It's awesome to be here. Super excited about this opportunity. It's great to talk to you again.
Well, I am thrilled to hear about your time at the White House and in the Marines. And I kind of want to start with what led you to want to be in the Marines to begin with, and then how did you end up working in airborne with the Marines?
Yeah. So growing up as a kid, the military was always the path I was going to take. It was how I got there. So my father was a big influence in my early years, really instilled a love of aviation to me. So I was the kid growing up that had model airplanes hanging from the ceiling by fish and wire and, Top Gun, that sort of thing. G.I. Joe. I blame my time in the Marine Corps on G.I. Joe, to be honest with you. But that really led me down that path. So as I came to the end of my high school career, I was not the best student in the world. I didn't graduate. The only reason I graduated high school was my wife forcing me to go. So military was the path. Initially wanted to look at the Navy. Naval aviation is kind of the top of the tier. Went in to talk to the Navy recruiter, and the Marines did a great job of poaching me off of them, really selling the difficulty of being a Marine, the pride of being in the Marine Corps, where the Navy sells you on trying to come into the Navy. The Marine Corps tells you you're not good enough. So it makes you want to prove to yourself and everybody else. So they took a kid with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, 19-year-old kid, and kind of beat that out of me and taught me a new way of operating.
Well, I love that. And I love that you sound like a guy who does not shy away from a challenge. And it seems like that probably served you well over your 16-year military career. How did you end up working on Marine One? And what did that look like?
So throughout my life, my wife and I have been together since high school. She had a big influence, and she had an influence on this one with me. So went through basic training in the Marine Corps, Parris Island, went into your initial helicopter training where they teach you to be a mechanic, what a torque wrench is, what a wrench is. And going through that process in school, an HMX-1 recruiter showed up and said, "Hey, is anybody interested in coming working at the White House?" At this point, it was 1999, 2000, things were slow. There wasn't anything, 2001 hadn't happened yet. And my wife was going to school in Ohio. So I took the opportunity there to be a little closer to her, to be stationed in DC, so that I could be closer to my wife. The other piece that really played out is I have a clean background, right? I was one of the few kids coming out of high school that, I never had done drugs, never had tried out marijuana, never been arrested. So a big part of going to work for the White House is being able to obtain the clearance, the top secret security compartmentalized information, Yankee White, the mouthful, clearance to be able to sit in the back of a helicopter with the president and work there. So I fit those two molds, right? I was able to get a clearance, and I wanted to go there to be a little closer to the wife as she went through school. So that led me down the path of applying, getting cleared, and getting my initial station at Quantico, Virginia with HMX-1.
That's amazing. So that happened in 99, 2000, September 11th. You were right in the thick of the action. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and feel a little weird saying things, but a lot of it is still kind of cloak and dagger classified stuff. So I apologize. I know it sounds cliche. But yeah, September 11th, I was a 21-year-old corporal in the Marine Corps, had just gotten promoted. A big part of what HMX-1 does is outside of the dog and pony show you see with the fancy helicopter in the South Lawn, we do a lot of support actions in the back that we just term the classified mission of HMX-1. So during that period, I was sitting at a facility in DC, about a mile and a half from the Pentagon, waiting on the president's return from Florida to bring him back to the White House. So as events unfolded that day, we started to get a feel for what was going on. The initial attack, plane first hits the tower in New York. We start paying attention a little bit more. Second plane hits the tower. We realize what's going on. And at that point, the government kind of put in motion some of those contingency planning operations that we got involved in. So throughout the day, performed a variety of different missions, a variety of different contingency plans, ultimately resulting in the successful return of the president to the White House that day. I know it's all over the news. You can see our train of helicopters flying them back to the White House that morning, or that evening, excuse me. And then eventually with vice president being moved to undisclosed location for the next 2 months, and then multiple movements of cabinet members and everything else that went on during that day that is quietly managed to this day.
So I want to touch on where you started at the beginning of what you just told me, and that's that you were 21 years old. As you've reflected back over the last 20 years on that day and the leadership lessons that you learned in the heat of those moments, what would you say were your biggest takeaways from that?
Oh, I think I could write a book on that. So I was blessed at that time to be under the supervision of a very capable staff NCO, staff non-commissioned officer in charge that was my crew member there, or crewmate at that point. That was more than just a coworker. He was, I call him a daddy, right? He was the guy that had, before September 11th, had already taken me under his wing, was training me up, being that true mentor in my life. During that day, confusion was the mindset, right? It was just pure confusion. I remember sitting in the hangar, the doors come up and you can see the smoke and smell the smoke of the Pentagon coming across the river. And you realize things get real very quickly. Watching that staff NCO, called him Jack, not his real name, that was his call sign. Watching Jack operate that day was a true lesson in leadership, right? Because he immediately recognized what was going on. He immediately turned. And you got to remember, at that point, we didn't have combat experience in the Marine Corps, right? We hadn't been in war really. I mean, we've done some small operations, but we didn't have that mindset. We had always done training. Watching his mind click immediately from that training mindset to that operational mindset is something I'll never forget. And just the way he made tough decisions throughout the day really opened up my eyes to the need to make a very quick decision without all the information. You're never going to have enough information to make a solid decision, but being confident in your decision, being able to communicate that clearly and adjust when you realize that things aren't going right. It was an eye-opening experience for me, right? Like you said, I was a 21-year-old kid watching Jack operate, the way he managed me, the way he led both up and down, because we're dealing with pilots that are senior rank, senior officers in the Marine Corps were enlisted folk. Him guiding them as much as he was guiding me really left an impact on me that you can't just focus on those below you. You got to be able to take those ideas and project them upwards, guide those above you that you don't have real direct reporting power to, as it were, in the civilian world, and how to do that. So those are lessons that has really stuck with me from that young age that I've used throughout my time in the military and now in the civilian world.
So tell me how that relates to the civilian world, what you do now or what you've done in previous jobs since you left the military. How do you apply those lessons of the quick decision-making or the decision-making without all of the facts and being able to manage in a 360-degree world?
It's a great term. I love the 360-degree world because that's what operations is, right? You're getting hit from every angle, trying to keep an operation moving. So yeah, since I've left the military, I've sat in a couple of different large organizations, Honeywell, Wells Fargo, Fortune 500 companies, down to smaller companies like DevReady and other smaller companies that I've been a part of. And those lessons really do apply in a multitude of different ways. When you sit in a large corporation, there tends to be a hesitancy to make a decision to stand out, right? A lot of folks are very, very nervous about making the wrong decision, how that'll impact a lot of things. And you're able to cover that up in a large corporation because there's so many layers, right? Ultimately, it bogs down. It bogs down your process. It bogs down the way things operate, based just off of decision paralyzation. Excuse me, can't talk this morning. So one of the ways I have been able to stand out in those larger organizations, and things I've tried to instill in those below me, is make a decision, go with it. Don't be afraid of the failure, right? Everybody's going to have a failure point. Not every decision is going to be the right one, but if you can communicate your plan effectively up to those above you, as much as you can below you to get things to move, they will understand when those failures occur and always have a contingency plan, right? So as you communicate upwards, part of that communicating, if, hey, this is a decision I'm going to make, this is the path we're going to take. If it doesn't work, this is the time frame we'll understand that it's not going to work. And this is the time, this is what we do to make adjustments. So it's no different than sitting in a cockpit, right? You have an in-flight emergency. Checklist doesn't cover every piece. Sometimes you just got to kind of go up the seat of the pants, but you've got to be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, right? It plays over quite a bit. that same mindset, that same compartmentalization of an emergency. And then when you look at leading up, a lot of folks get stuck in their role, right? They get tied into titles, they get tied into what the reporting structure is in the civilian world. I can only lead those below me. The reality is you have to lead those above you. Sitting with DevReady is a great example, right? Mike has some strengths that I will never be able to have mentality-wise, the way he approaches things. But in the same token, I fill gaps in his approach, right? He sits above me, he owns the company, but I have to be able to lead him down different paths, different thought processes, different ways of approaching a problem, as much as he has to be able to lead me to grow, right? And that is something that I learned, like I said, very quickly on September 11th and continued to be impressed upon me through my time in the military.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we really need to keep in mind as leaders, especially in an organization where we're not at the top, where we answer to someone else. They hired us or brought us on to the team for a reason, and that's to fill some gaps in their own skill set. And so we need to have the confidence in what we bring to the table to be able to contribute those strengths to the leader of the organization. I think that's really wise. And I think that it's cool that you recognize that. So tell me something else that you learned from being in leadership and leading in an upward and downward and probably sideways, very much like a helicopter moves, right? You had to lead in all the directions that a helicopter moves, and pretty quickly when you were in the Marines, you were interacting with people from very different cultures and very different power structures. Tell me about leadership across cultures. I think that's probably one of the little known skills that you had to have.
That is a great question. So yeah, in my time in the military, like you said, I spent 9 years working for the White House. The rest of my time I spent in the Fleet Marine Corps operationally, doing deployments. So that gave me a wide range of exposure to every different aspect of people in this world, right? So working for the White House, you're a little bit more on the civilian side of things, right? You have to maintain your military bearing, your military approach to things, but you're interacting with Secret Service, you're interacting with foreign dignitaries, you're interacting with the foreign dignitaries, staff, and those folks. Then you get in the military, you deploy to Iraq, and you have third country nationals that are everywhere around you, right? So you're interacting with guards and everybody that cleans the porta potty to those folks that are giving you food. And then in the Marine Corps, it attracts a wide range of people, right? It is truly a cross section of the American experience sits in the Marine Corps, right? So you've got to learn how to do all that. One of the biggest things, and people don't usually tie it to the military leadership approach, is empathy, right? No matter who I talk to, no matter who I dealt with, be it the President of the United States, to a Lance Corporal coming in the Marine Corps, I always said they put on their pants the same way in the morning, right? Most people put them on one leg at a time, right? Some people are a little more acrobatic and do two at the same time. It's just not in my skill set. But you come from a base there, right? We're all people, right? President of the United States is as much a normal person that wants to have normal interactions and be treated with the same manner as the young guy coming up to the Marine Corps. You take that and you expand that out, that everybody, even though we're all the same, we all have different motivators. We all have different things we're looking to get. We all have different places we want to go. So really getting to know people, and not just getting to know them, but enjoying to get to know people. You can't fake it. You have to actually be genuinely involved in somebody's life, care about somebody's life, to be able to find those pieces, to truly have empathy for somebody. You put that all together, and it kind of gives you a different approach than what people think the military does. The military leadership, stern, direct. You set standards, you meet standards. To get people to meet standards, though, is much more nuanced. You've got to be able to learn how to motivate them. And that's something I learned in the Marine Corps. I think a lot of great leaders in the Marine Corps learn is the empathy for those below you, to understand what motivates them and to adjust your approach based on those people. I'm going to talk to a Secret Service agent a little bit different than I'm going to talk to a Lance Corporal. I'm going to try to get to understand them a little bit differently, my approach, but in the end, I'm trying to figure out what motivates them. What are they trying to get out of the conversation? What are they trying to get out of the situation? And then see what I can do to support them in that manner. Not just tell them what to do, but teach them how to do it. Teach them the soft skills that go around doing that, and then allowing them to go out and do it themselves.
I think that's amazing. And what I hear from what you're saying is that not only is empathy important, but empathy needs to underpin your communications. And so, what are some of the communication skills that you see in other leaders that you think are great and effective in the civilian world?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So there's such a wide range of communication methods that it's a little difficult to play out, right? You talk pre-COVID, and a lot of it is face-to-face in-person communication. It is body language. It is the words they're using. It's not just looking to somebody in the screen. So if you talk pre-COVID, a lot of the great leaders I had carried with them a presence, I guess would be the term. And a lot of it has to do with body language, how you walk into a room, how you present yourself, and then how you communicate. It's clear, concise. Those folks that I looked up to were direct, but not rude. They were open to new ideas. They would actively listen. And I know these are all kind of cliche terms, right? Empathy, active listening, but they're true. I could tell when I talked, I had an amazing boss when I first got out of the military. Transition out of the military is difficult for anybody. I had a boss at Honeywell that truly listened, right? Truly understood my point of view, but would approach it and very directly say, no, it's not going to work. This is why. Or yes, let's try it. Go take the risk and do it. His communication style was direct, open, and honest. But he also had in-person, interactions, the body language to go with it. He was there side by side with me. It's more difficult now in COVID, right? So how do you translate that to a TV screen, computer screen? You've got to be able to write clearly on an email, right? And you've got to almost think, the great leaders that I think of now that I've dealt with can put together an email that is almost conversational, right? It's the same conversation you'd have in person, but coming across over email. And then when you get on the phone with them, they're able to bring across that understanding of active listening, that same body language, but get it through verbally, right? Which is difficult. It's funny, you come back to the aviation world. As you sit and listen to, you're talking to ATC, you're talking to approach, you can tell when that person on the other end is engaged in your flight, right? When they pay attention, that same mannerisms that comes across over comms, you can take that skill set and bring it across over Skype. You've got to be able to bring it across over the phone. So the great leaders that I think of now in the civilian world have that ability to really, you can put them on comms in the busiest airspace today, and they'd be fine because they understand how to manage that and get their point across quick, concise, and with meaning.
Oh, that's so good. Well, you're obviously very skilled at this. So I'm going to ask you a tough question now.
Oh, geez. Let me prep here.
Okay.
Okay, what you got?
How do you fire people? What's your approach? Or how do you discipline people in a workplace?
So I'll hit the discipline aspect first. And I don't know if I really truly believe in discipline in a civilian workplace. I believe in corrections. I believe in setting a standard, letting people know if they're hitting the standard or not hitting the standard. If they're not hitting the standard, having that communication with them to this is what you're missing. This is how we get you there. It's a difficult conversation, right? To sit down in front of somebody that may be your friend and say you're not meeting it. I take that back to the military world. I was in charge as a corporal sergeant, 21 to 30-year-old guy, in charge of small teams, right? 4 or 5 guys that were about my same age, same peer group, that we'd go out and drink and hit the bars after work, right? At work, I had to be the guy to say, hey, you're not doing it right. Hey, you failed here. Hey, this is going on. So I learned at that age how to split the two apart and have a conversation, and then be able to still have the respect, the personal respect to go out and be friends with somebody, to really split the two without splitting the two, I guess. So my approach to discipline in the business world is based off of that, right? I'm going to approach you like a friend. If something is not working right, so I'm going to have the conversation. Hey, René, we said we were going to hit this goal. We didn't hit this goal. What's going on? Why didn't you hit the goal? How can we make it better? You take that over to the firing piece. The first thing I always do, and the thing I instill with managers below me, is nobody should ever be let go from a company by surprise if it is performance related, right? You obviously have layoffs that are really tough to get through, but if it's performance related, it should never be a surprise, because those conversations have to have occurred prior to in that friendly manner. So when you come to firing somebody, I'm just pretty direct, right? Hey, Renee, this isn't working out, right? I think you're a great person. I think you've got a lot of the great characteristics of this, of what would fit this role, but we're just not seeing the performance out of you that we need, right? It shouldn't be a surprise at that point. Personally, military has taught me how to have those difficult conversations, because you have to. There's a lot on the line for it. So taking that and applying it in a little more gentle manner than you would in the military, the civilian world, is really where it translates over. So yeah, I also never approach a firing personally as something that I enjoy, right? I never look forward to those conversations. I never, even if I know it's best for the business, I have yet to let go of somebody that I was like, I'm so glad they're gone, right? It is always, what could I have done different? What could I have done to save that person, to bring that person back around? So when you approach a conversation almost as much as your failure as it is theirs, it helps you come across, and it helps you find the words and mentality to really let go of somebody in the right manner, without making it personal, without making it more difficult than it has to be.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the empathy that you mentioned before. What would you say is your biggest failure? What's the one thing where you felt like you failed that you learned the most from in your career?
I've got so many of them. How many? You could fill up a massive trash can full of my failures. And I don't think it's career related for me. It's tied into my military experience, but it's not really career related. I think it kind of goes a little bigger than the leadership piece. As a country, as a government, we kind of let down our veterans when we leave the military. We are very good at supporting those that are active duty. We are not the best at supporting those when they leave the military, right? And that's just kind of a fact of the reality. Because of that, a lot of the vets form their own support groups, right? We form our own teams to help get each other through. I had a very good friend in the military. From my initial stationing at HMX-1 through my 16 years, him and I off and on were together for long stints of time, deployed with him a couple of times. Truly a good friend, not just a coworker, great friend, personal. Got out of the military, lost contact with the guy. I should have maintained a little bit better conversation. A couple of years go by, learned he's having a really difficult time. Should have taken the action to reach out to him. Should have done something, but to me, it's a failure, right? I recognize the issues were there, didn't do anything about it. Those go on for a while, and finally reaches a point where he's going through the divorce, got alcohol problems, everything else, and looks at taking his own life, right? Doesn't end up following through with it, but because of the support group that was around him, you start getting phone calls, hey, can you find this guy? We need to go find this guy. You bring the team together, you go find him. That's probably my biggest failure as a leader, as a friend, as a person, was not being there for him, having the empathy for him, having the understanding of his situation, taking my own time to do it. It was selfish on me. It was not the right way of approaching it, but really was probably one of my biggest failures, career-wise, anything else related-wise. It was an eye-opening piece for me, right? So that being a leader doesn't stop when you leave. When you leave an organization, being a leader means that you truly care about those people, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing, no matter what they need. You have to care about them.
I'm struggling with what to say there. That's so moving, and it's convicting to me to think about what I need to do to make sure that I am staying in touch with the people that I've worked with and interacted with over the years. I think that really is what a legacy of leadership is about, right? Is leaving a permanent imprint on someone's life and leaving a legacy of having invested in them and not let that investment molder or just kind of go away. That's incredibly moving, Steve. Thanks for sharing that with us.
No, I'm glad I could.
What if you were speaking today, if someone's listening who is young, going back to when you were deciding to join the Marines, knowing what you know now and all the things that you've learned over the years about leadership, what are some things that young people can do today to stand out in developing their leadership so that they can end up in a position where they're making a lasting impact on an organization or on other people's lives?
So I think the reality of today's world is young folks coming up have it much more difficult than you and I did. They are hit from a multitude of angles with social media, with expectations in school, with having to get their lives in order much earlier than you and I ever had to do. I'm 42 years old and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. 16-year-old kid in high school almost has to be on his career path at that point, right? So they have a much more difficult time finding time to learn those soft skills because they have to be so focused on so many different things that a young person is affected by today. So some of the bigger things I would say that stand out is, gonna sound a little rough, but keep yourself clean, right? A lot of the things that put me in a leadership position were because of my background being clean, right? Today you have to worry about what you've posted on Facebook, what you've put up on, not Facebook, I just dated myself, right? What are you putting on Snapchat? What are you putting on Instagram? You know, what are you doing on TikTok? Those things are going to stay with those young people their entire lives. So they have to be very cognizant of how they're doing, what they're putting on at 16 to set themselves up to be able to hit a leadership position at all, right? And then when you start looking soft skills, it's putting yourself in positions that may be uncomfortable, that you can learn from, right? You put yourself on a sports team, you may not feel comfortable taking a leadership position in a locker room. I grew up playing hockey, right? It may not feel natural to you. Put yourself in that leadership position. Don't be afraid to fail at that young age. Learn the lesson from it and apply it when you're older. So do things you're uncomfortable with. Put yourself in positions that you're uncomfortable with, and really start growing those skills and that lack of fear of failure, and the ability to learn from the failures to move on. So it builds some resiliency in your mind. It builds some confidence. One of the biggest things you get out of the Marine Corps is there's nothing I can't do, right? I was taught in the Marine Corps. I'm a Marine. There's nothing that's going to stop me, right? Reality is, there's a lot of things that are going to stop you, but you have to approach things with that mindset. And you learn that from a younger age by accomplishing things you didn't think you could. And you can't accomplish something you didn't think you could if you don't put yourself in position to do it. So don't be afraid to fail. Put yourself in those positions that are uncomfortable and go from it and learn.
One of the things I love the most about the military, and one of the lessons that I've taken, never having been in the military, is the value of an after action review. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's got so many different names, right? So it's an after action in the military. You come in the civilian world, you have quality reviews, you have rapid action plans, and rolling action item lists, and all these different things that you can put together for an action. So really, it comes down to the fact that you just got to figure out what you did and where you went wrong and where you went right, right? So there is a massive benefit from taking the time to do that, right? I come from a Lean Six Sigma background. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, which is great in large companies, but in and of itself is waste. It costs money to do those things. So when you apply that to a smaller business, you have to be able to take it and break out the pieces that are useful and really apply it without costing too much money. And the after action is one of those things that a lean that I take very, very seriously in these small businesses, but you have to approach it from shouldn't be more than 15, 20 minutes. You can't take 2 hours to do an after action, and you can't do an after action on everything that you fail at, right? You have to pick the things that are business impacted, that are going to make the most impact on revenue, that sort of thing. So when you sit down and you do it, one of the biggest principles is have an open mind. Everybody kind of comes into those sessions of, I know what went wrong. I don't know, why am I sitting here? I already know where my problem is. Some of those tenants, the 5 why analysis will tell you, you don't know, right? So you have to, before you walk into that after action as a leader, I'll use DevReady as an example. We're growing, right? There doesn't have the culture of Lean Six Sigma doesn't exist there. So as I take in and approach an after action, I do some discussions up front with the folks that are going in that have never done one before to say, hey, I need you to clear your mind. Here's the idea. I don't care what you think is wrong. We're going to approach it as if you don't. So don't go into the after action cold, especially with people that have never done one before. Make sure that culture, that mindset is there, and then really having a strong leadership presence in that after action, right? You have to guide the conversation. You have to control the conversation. Like so many meetings in today's corporate world, it can go haywire very quickly if somebody isn't guiding the conversation, and all of a sudden you're down a rabbit hole. So I approach it with an aspect of, I am controlling the conversation. I'm listening to everything everybody says. There are no bad ideas, but they have to be on topic. We have to be focused. And then on the other side, teaching people that because something came out as a failure doesn't mean you failed, right? That doesn't mean it's a personal attack on you. It doesn't mean You didn't have the skills to fix it. It means you don't have the ability to get better and move from it. But this is a learning opportunity. This is how we sit down and teach. This is how we get better. So really not making it personal. You do an after action. I hate coming back to saying, hey, Renee, you failed. It should be, hey, the process, Renee, that you control failed. How do we fix your process? Not how do we fix Renee? But it is so vital to do that look back and say, okay, we had a mistake. What do we do better next time? And that comes from aviation, right? Every time you sit down, you debrief. Every flight I took, we'd sit down and we'd debrief for 30, 45 minutes, and it was open, it was honest, it was direct. It was a little bit more personal than you do in the civilian world, because it was, hey, you came in way too hot there, sir. You scared the bejeebers out of me. Do it again, and I'm getting off the plane, right? Because the stakes are a little bit higher in the aviation world. But it is that open, honest communication of this is how we get better. We don't know what was wrong, and we're not here to blame people. We're here to get better.
I love that. And it's so important. I personally do after action reviews on my week, every week. What did I do well this week? Where do I have room for improvement in the next week? And then simply a kiss. What do I want to keep? What do I want to improve? What do I need to start? And what do I need to stop? And by doing that every week, I'm seeing where my processes are broken, or my habits are not serving me well, or maybe what I'm actually prioritizing and spending time on isn't really contributing to my overall goals. And by doing that on a weekly basis, and by looking at what went well, what were my wins, what were the big positive takeaways from this, I begin to balance out celebrating the wins and improving the areas where I need to improve. And as a perfectionist, it makes me not beat myself up quite as much. Do you have a similar practice?
I do. I kind of do it daily. It's probably too much for most people. It's probably too much for me mentally. But I am constantly reevaluating what I've done, right? So I turn off my computer at the end of the day, and you go grab a beer or whatever I'm deciding to imbibe in that day, and sit down and think, man, if I'd done this differently, way it would go. And it kind of makes me laugh. You use that KISS acronym. I think most people do those first three things very well, right? You talk about being perfectionist. It is that stop piece. What do we need to stop? No perfectionist wants to take things away. They just want to make it perfect, right? And you look at big business, nobody wants to take away pieces of a business. Nobody wants to understand what should we not be doing. So that is a big piece of where I focus my thought process of what are we doing today that we don't need to be doing? What are we wasting time on that we don't need to waste time on? It's a little more prevalent in big corporations. Wells Fargo does 1,000 things a day that they probably don't need to be doing, but because that's just the way we've always done it. Some of the most dangerous words in business, dangerous words in aviation as well. They continue to do it that way. So I think the first three people are very easy to sit back and think on, but focus on what do we need to stop? What do I need to get rid of in my life?
Yeah, it's so good. Well, any additional thoughts that you have on leadership or on leading yourself that you want to impart to our listeners today?
Yeah. Like I said, I could kind of go on forever, give you story after story of some of the great leaders I've seen in the military. Some of the things I'd like to say, though, is you look at military leadership and there's good and bad, right? You learn, I think a lot of folks have a view of people coming out of the military. They're just great leaders, right? They've learned how to be a great leader. We didn't just learn how to be a great leader from those around us. We learned how to not be a bad leader, right? How to not do the toxic things, how to not do the things to get people injured, how to learn those lessons. And you learn those lessons very hard in the military, right? Poor leaders lead to mishaps. Poor leaders lead to people getting hurt and, mission failures, right? So during my time in the military, in aviation specifically, I learned as much about what not to do as how to do it. We learn those lessons hard, right? So you put a plane in the dirt, you learn why that happened and what leadership decisions led to that. And you learn a multitude of different aspects of leadership, right? It really builds you out to be a holistic leader versus a very business-focused leader, a very personal mentor leader. It gives you the grand scheme approach, and that's probably why I ended up in operations, because I like to see every aspect of it, right? So it really does build on some of those key aspects of what you should be doing as a person more than what you do as a manager, as a director, as a VP of operations. So it was quite a big learning experience. The other thing I'd like to take over is the way aviation goes about leadership is different than most other areas, right? Leadership in the cockpit is a learned skill as much as it is a natural skill. It doesn't directly apply in a lot of aspects of outside of that cockpit, but a lot of it does. So being able to approach your skill set as you sit in the cockpit, as you sit as a crew member, and be able to apply those in other areas is really what got me to where I sit, right? I got out of the military and I didn't want to have to go get my A&P. I was kind of a stubborn guy. I've been working on the president's helicopter for how many years, and you want to tell me I can't go work on a Cessna 152? Come on now, right? I'm not going to go do that. So I had to learn how to take those skills and apply it over. And learning that it wasn't a direct application, it was a process of getting it over, was big for me and big in my success, and I think would be big for other success as well.
Oh, so many good lessons here. Steve, thanks so much for being on the podcast today. I appreciate you, and thank you so much for your service. I know that you served through some perilous times and you served in some fun times, and I appreciate that you've done both and have brought that leadership skill set to the civilian world, where we definitely need that, and appreciate all you do to support veterans who are coming out of the military now. I know you continue to do that. For those of you who enjoyed this podcast, would you please share it with others? Feel free to subscribe to it, to give us a 5-star review if you thought it was great. You can follow me on social media at René Banglesdorf on most handles. Steve, thanks again for being here today.
Renee, thank you again. I really appreciate the opportunity. Hopefully it was good listening for your listeners, and great talking to you again. Great seeing you.